Again, we want to welcome back those of you who have not been here for some time. All of us have not been here for some time, but we've regathered over the last several months. And some are here that haven't been here for a long time, and we're appreciative to see you and welcome you here into this community of faith this morning. We are addressing a series called Life's Great Questions. And these are questions that people ask themselves, no matter what their background is, to try to figure out what life actually means. And so these questions are on people's minds. I keep in dialogue with my neighbor. He's from France. Some of you know that France is an extremely secular place. In their constitution, they have written in their constitution. I have another Frenchman that I know with tears in his eyes. He said to me, "My nation in their constitution is atheist. As a nation, we do not profess God in France." And so I was talking to my neighbor this week. He's working on a project, and I heard him welding, and I heard him grinding. And so there's a white wall between his house and my house, and I have a chair right next to that. And I stand up on the chair, and I look over the wall. And I said, "Hey, what are you doing now?" And he showed me what he was doing. He's converting his van. He has a white van, and it has a fiberglass top on the top of it, and he's building a system whereby it will lift the top off so that he can actually have an area that he can then sleep in this van that he's making. And he's designing the whole thing himself. And so I said to him, last week I asked him the question, where do you think humans came from? And you can watch the presentation from last week to get that story and his answer. But this week I asked him the question, what do you think it means to be human? So I'm standing up, there's a white wall between us, and I'm kind of talking loud, and he's got a yellow apron on with his welding outfit. He's got glasses on, and he says, "What does it mean to be human?" He told me, he said, "I don't know what it means to be human." And he said, well, I could tell his wheels were spinning in his mind. And he said, well, to be human, he said, well, you cannot have a proud attitude. I'm just sharing what he shared with me. You cannot have a proud attitude about this. I said, okay. I'm thinking to myself, I didn't have a proud attitude when I asked the question, but he said, you cannot have a proud attitude that human beings are something superior than everything else we see on the earth. Okay. So then I asked him, well, what do you think is the difference between a human and an animal? He said, there is a difference. He said, human beings have the ability, very interesting what he said to me then. He said, human beings have the ability to think about what they're thinking about, and they have the ability to think about the future before the future happens. And he said, I don't think animals can do that. And then I said, well, something's going on in nature because there's instinct, because bears hibernate in the wintertime, and I think they kind of pile up some food in advance. I said, I wonder where that comes from, that they have the ability to do that. Well, just prior to this, by asking the question, he had said to me, oh, I'm redesigning my whole invention that I'm making to raise my top on my van so that I can sleep in it. I'm having to cut the wheels off that I had, put new wheels on. I've redesigned it. And then he said, with my design then, I'm modifying and making my piece of machinery to lift up the top of my van. And I'm thinking to myself, first there's design, and then there's actually making the design. And so he shared with me, he said, human beings are intelligent. They can design things and then they can make them. And so he didn't, as an atheist, he didn't really know what it meant to be human. And so I said, okay. Then as I was going down off the chair, he said to me, Greg, I really appreciate you asking me the question. And the question last week. And he said, if I ever have a question, if I ever have a question that I need an answer to and I don't know the answer, I'm going to ask you. I said, oh, okay, that's fine. I may not have the answer, but that's great. I popped back down, and then I went back to what I was doing. Today we want to look at the difference between what naturalism says, what comes with naturalism, or what generally we would call evolution on one hand. And then on the other hand, we want to, for a moment, we want to look at what is the view that comes from creationism. And again, as we do this, we want to have an honest, authentic inquiry into what comes with into the mind and the mindset of a person who doesn't believe in a first mover or a creator, believes in naturalism, believes in the Big Bang and the evolutionary process of the entire universe. What comes with that in defining what a human being is? And then secondly, what comes with creationism or theism, believing in a creator? What does that say about a human being? And I would remind you also that this presentation is not only for us today, but it's for others who may choose to listen on YouTube in their search for what does it mean to be a human being. So first we turn to, I'm going to turn this a little bit sideways so I can turn back and look at this as I talk to you, share with you. As we look at naturalism, the view from naturalism starts with Carl Sagan, an astrophysicist, and he says it clearly. The cosmos, the universe is all that is and ever was and ever will be. What he's referring to in the evolutionist, the naturalist mind, is all that the world and the universe consists of is matter. That's all there is matter. And he's saying that's all that's ever been, and it's all that is and all that will ever be. The universe, including our world, is a closed system in an evolutionary naturalist mind. What does that mean? That means that there is no outside intervention to life. There's nothing that comes outside of the cause and effect relationships we have, and gravity and physics. There's nothing beyond that. There's nothing that can intervene into life. So someone who is a evolutionist, a naturalist, doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in a first mover, doesn't believe in creation, doesn't believe in a start. So if someone were to come and speak to an evolutionist and say, you can't believe what happened, God answered my prayer, in their mind, they would think that can't be, because there is no intervention into life. And they would dismiss that and say that their belief would believe that cannot happen, because one, I don't believe in a God, and two, there's nothing that intervenes into life. Of course, we remember that this is the vast majority of the mindset of America today. This is the vast majority of the thinking process of people today. To understand today. How do we understand today? Outside this church, in LA, in major metropolitan areas of the United States, Europe especially, Australia, the third world. This is especially true in the first world. First world, Australia, Europe, and the United States, Canada. Matter has always been and will always be, and that's all there is, because nothing can come from nothing. You see, naturalists that think about it, they think, wait a minute. There wasn't a Big Bang. That can't be. Because all there is matter, and nothing can come from nothing. You think, nothing can come from nothing. So the intelligent naturalist admits that matter has always been. Have no idea how it got there, but there has always been matter. And there always is matter, and there always will be matter. Human beings are built out of matter, and when their life ends, when they die, they return back, all those different parts that compose a human being, they go back into basic matter, and there is no more. There is no more human. It's over. Done. End of story. Done. A human being becomes kind of in a naturalist worldview, honestly and authentically becomes a machine, and kind of a cross between an animal, an intelligent animal, and a machine in human identity. La Meurier says, let us conclude boldly then that man is a machine, that in the whole universe there is but a single substance with various modifications. In his book, Man is Machine, page 177, that's what we are, is a machine. And when you think about this today, in the computer science world, there's this whole development of technological thinking process. For the life of me, I can't remember what they call it. Some of you know what they call it. It's intelligent something. It's artificial intelligence. I was reading that in the coaching industry, they have artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence, they have an algorithm where they've taken 100 questions to ask people to help them. And the machine, the computer, with a voice, asks the question to the person, and the person answers, and the machine can differentiate emotion out of the human voice and other things out of the expression and the words that are given, and then the logarithm goes to, based on what was said, it goes to a next question to ask the person. This all happens talking to a computer machine that has the likeness through the logarithm of being able to take on intelligence. For some naturalists, that would say, well, that's a rudimentary example of a human being, Humankind's nature is determined by the actions that we do, our achievements, our capabilities, our imagination. Human value to the humanistic mind, to the naturalistic mind, to the person who's believing in evolution. One's identity, one's value is not inherent in a person. It's inherent in what you actually do. The value that you bring, of what you're capable of. And of course, different people are capable of different things. And so it just stands to reason, I mean, it does to me, that there would be different values placed on human beings based on their capability, based on their education, based on their creative thought, that there would be more important, more valuable human beings, and then there would be less human beings. This all would be a part of the survival of the fittest, that you would want those top human beings to be the ones that would multiply, and the ones that are at the bottom, you would not want to multiply. It's reasonable to infer humanity is determined with no choice, just cause and effect. However, this leads to no responsibility for anyone's actions. If there is no morality, if there's nothing we can call morality, good, bad, then, and I have no choice, then I have no responsibility for what I do. And hence there's no morality. There's no responsibility for our actions. There's no ethics. There's no right and wrong. So in the naturalist mind, in the evolutionist mind, an exception has to be made. Otherwise, you would have just total, complete chaos. And so the naturalist says an exception is made for humanity alone. We must be free to choose to have any type of morality. And then we have to ask the question, and this is a slippery slope. This is a very, very slippery slope. If there's no given sense of morality, of right and wrong that's been determined outside of human beings, that just stands, that there is a moral code of conduct for humanity. If that code does not exist outside of us by a mover, a designer, a creator, then where does one get a sense of morality? And so one has to turn. Values of right and wrong are determined by one's cultural group or the majority. And this is a slippery slope. Because in Nazi Germany, the Nazis determined that Jews were non-humans. And then they took action accordingly to eliminate them. In the United States of America, during slavery, people believed that slaves were non-human beings. Consequently, they could treat them as slaves. Human beings want coherence in what they do. Human beings want guidance in what they do. And so, if the majority decide something, that becomes the value, that becomes the belief, that determines what is right and wrong. And we see in history that tragedy, the elimination, the Holocaust of the Jewish nation was occurring. And it stemmed out of evolutionary, naturalistic thinking. History moves forward in a line, but there's no purpose in the end. There is no end, there's no purpose. Naturalism seeks only to answer the what, and to be honest, it can barely do that. Because as I talk to people in this camp of thinking, they don't really know how humanity got here. But what they don't really address is why. Why is a human here on this earth? And why leads into purpose. There's no great purpose for life. And there's no end we are moving towards. When a human dies, the matter parts composing a human being return to basic matter. Life ends at death. There is no more. And I don't know if some of you are beginning to sense where this all leads, but this leads as someone thinks about it. If someone is intellectually honest with themselves, this begins to lead into despair. It leads into chaos. It leads into meaninglessness. It means into what's happening in San Francisco right now. I've shared it before. It is unbelievable. It's unbelievable what's happening. You can go into a store. You can go into a clothing store. This is true. This is not a tale. This is happening today in San Francisco legally. You can go into a store, a drugstore. There's all kinds of tapes on the internet about it. You can go in, and if you steal less than $1,000 worth of goods, clothes, jackets, groceries, drugstores. I've seen pictures of people, they have a big bag, they take their arm along a shelf, they just slide it all into a really big bag, they put it on their back, the security guard is right there. I was talking to someone who's just moved here from Dubai, and I told them the story. I said, this is going to be very, very different in America than it is in Dubai, because they have security guards all over the place, and if anyone steals anything, and they have cameras too, you're arrested. And if you're not from that country, you're deported immediately. People are doing this left and right. And of course, what's happening is drugstores are closing, clothing stores. I saw a video and a lady cut a wire that was holding all these clothes back, took her arm, one arm with this arm and one arm with this arm, and someone was right there with their camera photographing it. And she just went out of the store, and you could see the security guard just standing there, and he knew the law in San Francisco that the person cannot be arrested. And they just walked out of the store. It's moral chaos. Moral chaos is happening. And the cry of the human spirit goes out in despair of what in the world is happening with the human race. No meaning, no beginning, no end. The end of life, I am no more. Life has no meaning outside of what I attribute to it. There's no goal that life is moving towards. All values are somewhat relative to the group. They're not absolute. They're relative. I could go from one culture to another culture, and what is important, what is true, what is false, what is good, what is evil, would change. based upon going into a different group. This is the mindset operating in the United States today, the dominant mindset in America today. What are you left with in this view? Well, it takes faith to believe in this view of where I came from and who I am. That I'm a machine, that I'm the highest form of animal, that all I am is matter, that I have choices to make, but all truth is relative. It's flexible. It's not absolute. There is no truth outside myself. The truth is inside me. So then, you've heard this before, I'm sure. I appreciate your truth. It's not my truth, it's your truth. Have you heard that before? That's your truth. That's not my truth, that's your truth. I have my truth. It takes faith to believe. It leaves one with no meaning in life. Our identity as a human machine. Ethics are determined by society and culture, with enforcement with those in power, which happen to be the most fit because they have the most power. And it ends in one's mind. It creates chaos. It creates chaos. I dislike sharing this because it's painful of where this leads a person in their thinking about what it means to be a human being. But it is what it is. If we look at it authentically and realistically and truthfully, this is where evolution, this is where naturalism, this is where it goes. It goes to despair, human despair. The creationist view. Creationist view is the view that I'm in. That's my assumption. What comes with the creationist view? Is an entirely different mindset. There's different presuppositions. There's different guiding principles in the mindset of a creationist. There's a story. There's a creator, there's a maker, there's a mover, there's human identity, and there's moral order. It says in the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 1, in the story of creation, God takes the creator of all of life, God takes 6 days and he creates all of life. And the seventh day he rests because God is a relational God who loves his creation. And in Genesis chapter 1, it says about humanity. Then it says in chapter 1, verse 26, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the air and the livestock and all the wild animals and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. In the creation story, we find a separation between the created order and human beings. Human beings are given the responsibility by the Creator to be the steward, to be the manager, to be the cultivator, to be the caregiver of all of creation, to care for it. Humanity also in the creation story winds up with the identity of being in the image of the one who created them. The scriptures go on and say that a part of our identity is that we are the children of God, that we are in the family of God, that God is both a powerful God who can intervene and create the world and everything in it by speaking through 6 days. And then God is a personal God, because then he comes in the creation story and he touches the ground and he shapes Adam and Eve and he breathes into their... It's as if God is touching. It's like God is kissing what he's created. And he breathes into the nostrils the breath of life. And man becomes a living being with matter and the breath of life from God. As the son and daughter of the Creator, with significance in one's identity, in relationship with the wholly other, God himself, who's personal and wants to know us and wants us to know him. God creates a moral order because he gives to Adam and Eve, he gives them a test of good and evil. God himself places in the Garden of Eden the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he tells them and instructs Adam in the creation story, don't go by that tree. Don't pick its fruit. If you pick the fruit, you will surely die. We learn from the story that God is the one who is determining good and evil outside of Adam and Eve. That there is absolute truth outside of human beings from the one who's created everything. And then, of course, we learn from the story and about human identity, the story of the fall and the struggle between good and evil, because there is a supernatural being in the Garden of Eden to tempt Adam and Eve. A real being, not a fairy tale, not a figment of one's imagination, but one called the devil or Satan himself, who's deceptive, who is in a conflict with God, who is the very opposite of God, who's not good, who's the embodiment of evil and deception. And the devil deceives Eve by making bad look good, by making distrusting the truth of God look unbelievable. And the truth that he is projecting, he made it look good. And so Eve uses her free choice as a human being, and she chooses to break faith with what God had set up as good and evil. And she chooses evil over good. She chooses to believe Satan and evil against God and truth. And then we have sin. Sin. And all humanity is lost in the choice. Adam and Eve choose to walk against God, to disbelieve God, to break God's truth. And like dominoes, the whole Adam and Eve being the first dominoes, as they fall, the entire human race after them falls too, with a fallen nature, bent towards disbelief in God, bent towards evil rather than good, bent to falsehood rather than seeking truth, as a nature that human beings are born with. Then we encounter in the story the greatest scandal that has ever happened. It's scandalous. This story is the greatest scandal you will ever hear in your life. It also happens to be the best news you will ever hear in your life. But it is scandalous what happened. The Bible says In Romans chapter 3, in the creation story, God creates humanity. He creates humanity with a choice between good and evil, to trust Him as God. And Adam and Eve choose to turn away, to disbelieve God. The human race falls into evil, and the entire human race is lost. But the Creator is a personal God. The Creator is a loving God. The Creator values human beings, not for just what they do, but for who they are as a child of God. Just like a parent would value their children. If their child is obedient or not, the parent still loves, has warmth, compassion, tenderness for their own child. So what does God do? God moves to redeem all of humanity. And the scandal is in how He did it. God would take His reputation, and He would make His reputation the worst reputation that there has ever been. How so? God would send His Son, Jesus, and God the Father would allow His Son to take on the reputation of all the broken people and the fallen people that have ever lived in the past, live in the present, and will ever live in the future. And God attributed all of that scandal to Himself. Jesus destroyed His reputation because He took on the reputation of every fallen human being. He took it onto Himself. The scandal was so great. When you think about it, the scandal was so great. When God the Father looked at God the Son, He saw us, not His Son. And then God in our place, Jesus in our place, the Father moved to judge, to condemn, to say, this is not right. And Jesus dies for the entire human race. It says in Romans chapter 3 and verse 23 through 25, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And all, if all have sinned, turned away from the Creator, broken the truth of the Creator, distrusted the Creator, all. In verse 24, then it says, and all are justified freely by His grace. Jesus would come and stand in our place as a human being. And He would, human being that was also God, and He would take upon Himself as a substitute all that belongs to us. Scandalous. Scandalous. And He would offer to the human race the free gift of redemption, salvation. Verse 24 says, all are justified freely by His grace, and through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ, God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement in our place, we could say, through the shedding of His blood, the cross, to be received by faith. It's a gift. It's a free gift. There's nothing we can do to merit it because someone outside of the human race had to intervene into the human race and do for the human race what the human race could not do for itself. And so, attached to the creation story is the story of the greatest scandal ever. That God himself, for his lost children, think about it, would completely destroy his reputation and identity in Jesus for each and every single one of us, so that then he could offer to us his perfect life to cover our life and to give us a gift of redemption. And with the gift of redemption comes a new start. God actually shares his life with us as his children so that we can live the life we want to live. And in this life, there's order. There's not chaos. There's order. There's a personal God that intervenes in life, that can do miracles in life, that can move between cause and effect and intervene between the two. And the miraculous can happen. In this place, on our prayer list, because we believe that God is powerful and personal, we believe and know that God intervenes in life when we talk to him in prayer. My sister, my own flesh and blood, has been on this prayer list looking in desperation for a house in a terrible, terrible, abusive relationship with someone else who's defacing her worth every day. It's unthinkable what's happening. And in desperation, I'm talking to her on the phone and listening to her and the cry of her heart, I've got to get out of here. And a group of people on our prayer list, on our prayer team, began to pray for her. And a whole series of events began to happen and fall into place as if there was a plan being executed in her behalf, step by step by step, until finally, intervention after intervention after intervention in answer to prayer occurred from God. And now today, this last week, she bought her own home. She moved into her own home. And she is so utterly and completely overwhelmed with joy. And I said to her on the phone, I said, Ann, remember, this is an answer to the prayers of many in your behalf. And that happens over and over and over again, because God is a powerful and personal God who's created us, who's redeemed us with sacrifice, who cares so intimately about our life and wants, above all things, relationship with us. What does this mean in the creationist view? It means humanity is valuable in themselves, not merely by what they do, but inherently within themselves. Humanity finds meaning in God's great purposes. There is a meaning to life and there is an end to life, because in the God story it says this world will end and God will return for his people in this great struggle between good and evil, between God and Satan. God will intervene in the end and ultimately rescue and redeem his people physically from the earth. There's hope. Humanity can be hopeful, accepting God's redemption as a gift. There's hope in that, not despair. There is hope. Humanity can have hope in the end of history, with God returning to take us to a new perfect life where love rules the day. Meaning and purpose is infused into the creationist mind, that there was a beginning And God began, and God will end, and God will start again. And in the midst, God in a relationship with Him brings meaning to our human existence. That we are His child. That we are a part of His family. We have been adopted into it by His redemptive act in His Son, the great scandal of all time. So there's the naturalist view on one hand, there's the creationist view on the other. And as for me, as I weigh it honestly, as I weigh it in my mind, experientially, when I think about the naturalist mind and what comes with it, I feel despair in my heart. When I weigh in my mind what it means to believe in God and creation and redemption, hope and meaning come into my heart and life. And so for me, I choose, with my choice, I choose creation. I choose God. I choose to direct my faith in God and His story as opposed to the evolutionary story. I don't know which way you're directing your faith, but I hope you consider the God story and what it brings into the human experience: meaning, love, relationship, and probably most needed today, great hope. Great hope. Amen.